Stephen King's 1986 bestseller It came out 6 years after the real-life killer clown, John Wayne Gacy, was sentenced to death. Was Pennywise actually inspired by this notorious serial killer? John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown, was one of the most dangerous serial killers in American history. He raped and murdered more than 33 men and boys in Illinois between 1972 and 1978. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois. He was the second child out of 3 siblings and the only son of his parents, John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson. Although he was close with his mother and sisters, Gacy suffered a complicated relationship with his father. His father was an alcoholic who often physically and emotionally abused Gacy and his family. As a result, his mother tried to shield him from the abuse of his father, only to be accused of being sissy, mama's boy, and probably growing up queer. When Gacy was 7 years old, he suffered sexual abuse from a family friend who is a contractor. He would sometimes molest Gacy in his truck. He was afraid of his father blaming him for this, so he never told him. The abuse from his father continued through high school, and even after that. One high school friend of Gacy recalled how his father would ridicule and beat Gacy on several occasions without provocation. This friend vividly remembered one occasion when they were 15. He witnessed Gacy's father come out drunk from the basement and started beating Gacy while belittling him. Gacy never fought back and would only put up his hands to defend himself. Gacy himself admitted that he still loved his father despite all the mistreatment. He just felt that he was never enough in his father's eyes. He craved his father's approval, something he would get later in his life. In 1964, Gacy married his first wife, Marilyn Myers. The couple moved to Waterloo, Iowa, where Gacy became the manager of KFC stores owned by his father-in-law. Myers gave birth to a son in 1966 and a daughter 1 year later. This period in his life was described as perfect by Gacy. He made good money from his job and he had his perfect little family. He also finally gained his father's approval. When his parents visited him in 1966, a few months after their son was born, his father apologized for the physical and emotional abuse he had inflicted upon his son. His father shook Gacy's hand and happily said, "Son, I was wrong about you." But it was during this perfect period that Gacy committed his first crime. He would make sexual advances to the young men who worked for him after getting them drunk. If they rejected him, he would claim it as a joke or as a test of their morals. All of this led to the sexual assault of the 15-year-old Donald Voorhees, the son of his colleague, in 1967. It wasn't until a year later that Voorhees told his father, who immediately reported it to the police. The police arrested Gacy and charged him with sexual assault of Voorhees and another victim, 16-year-old Edward Lynch. December 3, 1968, Gacy was sentenced to 10 years in prison. On the same day, his wife petitioned for divorce and to be awarded all of their assets. The court ruled in her favor less than a year later. Gacy never saw his first wife and children again. Gacy was granted 1 year parole after serving 18 months of his 10-year sentence, on the condition that he moved back to Chicago to live with his mother. His father had died from liver cirrhosis while he was in prison. So on June 19, 1970, Gacy moved back to Chicago to live with his mother. Shortly after that, he got a job as a cook in a restaurant, a skill he had picked up while in prison. After being released on parole, Gacy's life of crime didn't stop. In fact, it was just starting. In 1971, he was charged with 2 more sexual assault cases. One was dismissed because the victim failed to show up in court, and the other one was dropped because the victim tried to blackmail him. In the same year, Gacy bought a ranch house near the village of Norridge in Norwood Park Township with a financial assistance from his mother. He would later start his own construction company, starting as part-time work in 1971 and switching to full-time in 1973. A year later, in 1972, he would marry Carol Hoff. a girl he briefly dated in high school. They divorced 3 years later, in 1975, because of his increasing sexual excursions with young men and teenage boys in their own home. It was in 1972 that he committed his first murder. Believe it or not, his first murder was accidental. It happened around 6 months before he married Carol Hoff. Gacy's first victim was 16-year-old Timothy McCoy. He met McCoy at Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal and lured him into his car to take him sightseeing around Chicago. He took McCoy to his home with the promise that he would drive him back to the terminal the next morning to catch his bus. The next morning, he woke up early and found McCoy in his doorway with a kitchen knife in his hand. He thought McCoy was trying to kill him, so he jumped at him to wrestle away the knife, banged his head against the wall, and pinned him to the ground. He then stabbed McCoy in the chest multiple times. As McCoy lay dying, he walked to the bathroom and washed the knife. He then went to the kitchen and saw that the boy had prepared breakfast for 2 people. McCoy had absent-mindedly walked to his bedroom with a kitchen knife in hand to wake him up for breakfast. Although it was accidental, Gacy claimed that his murder triggered something in him. When he stabbed McCoy and listened to him dying, gasping for air, he claimed to experience mind-numbing orgasmic pleasure like never before. He added, "That's when I realized that death was the ultimate thrill." Despite this, Gacy didn't commit his second murder until 2 years later, in 1974. The victim remains unidentified until today. This was the first victim he killed by strangulation, a method he would use to kill his future prey. In 1975, he committed his third murder. This time it was an employee of his construction company, John Butkovich. Butkovich's parents reported his disappearance to the police, and Gacy was questioned as part of the investigation. There were reports of a disagreement between Gacy and Butkovich over outstanding back pay one day before his disappearance. Gacy told the police that he met Butkovich on the day of his disappearance and has resolved the problem with him. There was no further investigation into Gacy despite how Butkovich's parents kept calling the police more than 100 times over 3 years to urge them to investigate Gacy further. It was also in 1975 that he started to perform as a clown. He created his own clown characters, Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown. In fact, his clown persona doesn't have anything to do with his murders. It was just something he did because it reminded him of being a child. But because he would often drink at the local bars after performing while still in his clown costume, pictures of him as a clown circulated after he was arrested. That's how he got the moniker of the Killer Clown. After his second divorce was finalized in 1976, was when he started to commit most of his murders. Gacy murdered at least 30 more young men and boys between 1976 to 1978. He would bury most of his victims in the crawlspace of his house. When the crawlspace ran out of space because of the sheer volume of his atrocity, he started burying them around his property, and later threw their body in the Des Plaines River. On December 11, 1978, he was on his latest victim, Robert Piest. Piest was a 15-year-old teenager who worked part-time at Nissen Pharmacy in Des Plaines. That day, Piest's mother picked him up at the pharmacy to drive him home so their family can celebrate her birthday together. He told his mother to wait because some contractor wants to talk about a job with good pay. Piest never returned to his mother, so their family filed a missing person report. The pharmacy's owner named Gacy as the contractor most likely meant by Piest. Lieutenant Joseph Kozenchak chose to investigate Gacy more. When Kozenchak investigated Gacy's criminal background, he uncovered the previous sexual assault cases involving Gacy. When they visited Gacy on December 13, he admitted to being at the pharmacy on December 11 but claimed to have never offered Piest a job. He promised to come to the police station later that night to give a statement. Giving a reason that his uncle just died, Kozenchak waited for him until 1 a.m., but he didn't show up until 3:20 a.m., covered in mud. He claimed he just had a car accident, which was the truth, as he was involved in a car accident that night after disposing of Piest's body in the Des Plaines River. Meanwhile, the police got their first search warrant to search Gacy's home. There they found several suspicious items. This was enough to put Gacy under 24-hour surveillance. Gacy knew about the surveillance and would often invite the officers to a meal. During one of their breakfasts together, he taunted the officers by saying, "You know, clowns can get away with murder." Meanwhile, further investigations into Gacy's life were carried out. There was more and more evidence of his criminal activities. On the evening of December 20, Gacy, who felt the increasing pressure from police investigations, went to his lawyer's office. There he confessed his murders to his lawyer while drunk. The next day, knowing he would be arrested soon, he drove around with a rosary in his hand, visiting his friends and saying his final farewell. Fearing he would commit suicide, the police arrested him for the possession of marijuana, and later that afternoon the police would get their second search warrant. Armed with the search warrant, they searched the crawl space under his house and found several corpses. Later they found a total of 26 corpses in his crawl space and 3 corpses buried around his property. On December 22, 1978, Gacy confessed to the murder of approximately 30 young males. Gacy was brought to trial on February 6, 1980, and charged with 33 murders. On March 12, 1980, Gacy was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to death for each of his murders. He sat on death row for 14 years. He was executed May 9, 1994. Although the trial started in 1980, 6 years before Stephen King's masterpiece, It, came out, King never claimed to be inspired by Gacy. Pennywise was born out of children's common fear of clowns. So, what do you all think about this case? Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos.